So I think HPAs are a sport right now, but the question is, can we turn it into a mass sport with lots of attention and a growing sport? So yeah, my talk's about HPA as sport, sporting contest for human-powered airplanes for a mass audience. How could we get there, basically? So my background, I designed and built the Dash human-powered airplane. I can't believe it now, but I actually started way back in 2010, and it first flew in 2015. As David mentioned, I think it's been 4 years. I've been helping the University of Bordeaux Evering Institute build a second copy of the plane with some minor but important improvements, which we were very, very close to flying before COVID hit back in late February of 2020. And the students have been working on when they can, when they're not in lockdown. And we hope to be flying in just a few months this year. I've also participated in the BHP-FC Icarus Cup probably a half dozen times as a spectator, resurrected the Bangos the Theory aircraft as Voltaire one year, and I've helped run the team on the field for Aerocycle a couple of years. That's Aerocycle over here in the right. And so the initial inspiration, I mean, I think everybody's talked about, could we make HPAs an Olympic sport? How could we, make it bigger and have more events, et cetera, et cetera. But for me, it was attending Icarus Cup at Sywell. I didn't have any responsibilities at the time. I was just a spectator taking photos. My family was there and we were taking photos and videos. And that was the first year of the Jacobson, the various Jacobson prizes. This was a Jacobson figure 8, 400-meter spacing between two pylons, doing a figure 8. So basically a half-size Kramer course. And it was pretty exciting because sort of the three amigos of Aerocycle, Lewis Rawlinson, Kit Buchanan, and Niall Patterson, they were all making attempts at it and came very close to finishing it. And Niall did finish it actually on his first attempt, and he did about a 1.5 figure 8s. And so seeing that just while I was watching it, I was like, wow, this is really cool. We need to be able to figure out a way to get this to a lot more people, and have it really become an amazing sport. And then the second inspiration was the year later, there was a Jacobson triangle. I think it was a 300-meter on a side triangle based on the available room in Lasham that Kit did on an amazing flight where he needed a bunch more points to win the contest. So he did slalom first, went into the triangle, did the triangle, and then kept going to get duration. So what I'm going to try to do, let me just show you quickly here. Oh, and this is a overhead view of Kit's triangle. So he did the slalom here, then the triangle, then he did went a little bit farther to try to get the maximum duration. I am going to show you some training peak. Let's see, how do I do this? Got to do that. So I'm going to show you first the figure 8 from Niall's flight. Unfortunately, the data acquisition wasn't working during his flight, but this is one of Kit's flights where he made it almost all the way around. And so basically we're taking off from the runway here and we're going around doing a figure 8 in this direction, coming back around, and then finishing up with the second loop of the figure 8 here. And then after that, I'm going to show a short video of Kit's flight. I'm going to skip through these videos so don't watch the whole thing. And he started off doing these slaloms, then he went around and did the triangle, and then he kept flying a little bit more to get maximum duration. So this didn't work for the first speaker, but it worked okay for the previous speaker. So I'm going to try and show some videos here. And everybody let me know if the quality works well or not. So I'm going to, there we go. Okay, hopefully this will work. So I think this is, I'm having it small on my screen, so the bandwidth is low, but hopefully it expands to full size on your screen. Here we go. So this is takeoff. Again, I showed you the course there, and he's going over to the right. He's going to go to the first pylon. I'm going to skip ahead to where he's going into the first turn. Is this working okay? Is the video quality okay?
Yes, very good.
Okay, good. I don't know why, but I just think that this this turn looks really cool against the backdrop there. So what I'm doing here on both of these videos I'm going to show is I'm using a thing that's syncing two videos together. We don't have a lot of close-up video here, and I'll talk about, you know, the kinds of video you'd want to show in a sport, but at least this gives you a little bit of different perspective, and also sometimes one's out of focus, sometimes the other's out of focus. Now I'm going to skip forward to the completion of the second turn, and let's see if I get this in the right place. No, I didn't. Hold on. I think here is where I want to be. Yeah. So that's finishing the figure eight, which was great because I think we'd had probably 4 or 5 attempts before then by Lewis and Kit. And then the rules for this were whoever did the most parts of a figure eight, you could do multiple ones, was going to win if multiple people finished it. So he kept going and did another loop. I'm going to cut that short just so this isn't too long, but he went and did a whole other, you know, the second half of the start of the second figure, or the first half of the start of the second figure eight. Okay, now I'm going to skip over to Kit's flight. Start off with, this is for the triangle flight that I showed earlier. This is just showing up takeoff. Not sure if I can. Apologies for all the noise, but there will be some comments later that you want to hear. Okay, I'm going to skip forward. So he's doing his slaloms now, and I'm going to skip forward to the point where he's going into the first turn of the triangle. So if you're familiar with Lashin, this is turning off the runway, the 27 runway off to the left. And then he's going to go towards the first turn. I'm now going to skip into the first turn and into the start of the second turn through to the finish of the triangle.
Around second turn, just get it, not drop too much altitude. Definitely do this.
So you've got the audio from both of the video that Niall shot on the left and on me on the right.
It's in the back. Go round again.
That's my favorite part. Is Niall telling him to keep going. He's very enthusiastic, a great cheerleader. Okay, so now let me go back to the presentation. So did that video play through decently? Okay, good.
Yes, yes,
Um,
yes. Sorry.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So I was going to have a lot more video in my presentation, but since we were having so many problems when we were doing tests, that's basically the only video I'm going to try to pull off here. Okay, so let's talk about the existing rallies and events those two were part of one of them. There's the BHPFC Icarus Cup since 2012. The International Birdman Rally in Japan, Yomiuri TV sponsored. For 3 years, there was something called the Kari HPAC event. I attended one of those in 2014. And then there's some less serious things, which don't really, some people try to do some human-powered things in them, but they're basically flying gliders in kind of a jokey way off of a platform like the Bogmar Birdman and Red Bull Flugtag. This is the great race that's coming up, hopefully next summer. It's been postponed twice due to COVID. And then we're actually on the dash team considering trying to break the distance record and also setting some triangle records, which are there to be set, but nobody's actually set an official witnessed triangle in HPAs yet that counts towards an FAI record. So we've also tried that before in the desert. So I wanted to look at some other sports sort of for analogy and comparison. And this is the list of them, but I'm just going to go through them on separate slides here. So one that I think is a big one in terms of thinking of a couple of events that we might do is alpine skiing, and also in the way that sometimes they have sort of a ghost image on the giant slalom and downhill of the person who was in the lead versus the person who's going before. So you have the real image and then sort of the ghosty image next to them showing if they're a little bit behind or ahead. I think that's important for us because we're going to most events not be able to be flying simultaneously, but we want to be able to make this exciting for viewers and people who are attending in person. And then the one of the two events that we might do with at least two airplanes in the air at the same time is a side-by-side slalom, and this is an example of that in skiing. Athletics, track and field has a lot of examples of things that we might want to incorporate. Long distance things like the marathon and the 10K, sprints, so very fast, very short flights, which would be, probably with a very minimal wing area size, a small wingspan plane. And then they have combination events like decathlon, pentathlon, similar, we'll get into this in a bit, of what the BHPFC events are, where you have a scoring system and add them up. And that might be something, if we had enough events, where we could also have a combined event where one pilot does all of the things to get an overall score. And then sort of future type things, relay races, you could conceivably do relay races with HPAs. Expensive equipment, having to have multiple airplanes, I don't know if we pull that off, but it's an idea. But the other reason I mention this is I'm just thinking, how do these sports where the equipment cost is high do things? A bobsled can cost $30,000 to $50,000, which is kind of on the order of if we got economies of scale going on building a bunch of human-powered airplanes to use in contests, we could probably get human-powered airplanes made with sophisticated materials like carbon fiber at around that same amount or maybe a little bit more. So it's interesting to follow something like this to think about it. Gliding and sailing. I don't think too many people realize it, but gliding was actually kind of an Olympic sport. It was a demonstration sport in the 1936 Olympics. This is a poster about it, and this is the official Olympic airplane. They had identical soaring airplanes that they were supposed to use for these. They did some demonstration flights from the hills in Germany down to the stadium in 36, and then this thing called World War II happened, so the Olympics didn't happen for a couple of years, but until 1956, gliding was still listed as a possible alternate sport to be put into the Olympics, but it never was. Eventually, the air sports all went under the guise of the sports governing body, or the international sports body, there's different terms here, called the FAI, Fédération Aéronautique Internationale, or something like that. I get confused because there's FIA and FAI. FIA is the racing one. And anyway, the other sport, which is an Olympic sport, is sailing. These are all the 8 different classes of sailing, including windsurfing, that's in the Olympics right now. And then there's also very expensive, very high-tech sailing going on in things like the America's Cup. And then finally, air racing and motor racing. You would think air racing would be the most, I don't know, comparable sport, but I think for safety reasons and other reasons, I don't think we want to have a mass start thing or a race with a bunch of human-powered airplanes trying to take the same amount of airspace up at the same time, whether it's racing around pylons or going on a distance course. I think we want to space it out more like in a time trial situation. And the air races are very, what's the word? Basically, the Reno air races is it, except for some demonstration stuff by people like Red Bull, et cetera. So it's not really the kind of the mass expanded sport I'm talking about. But it is a very high equipment cost sport. And it's one I think that's mostly funded by the people that spend tons and tons of money on the airplanes. I don't think it's something where they're making much money back from it. I don't know exactly. Having a contest, you would have a marquee or something where the plane could be pre-set up and stuff. So probably really the minimum crew is only 3 people, like 2 people to help launch the plane and the pilot. But it, you know, in general, I think we have a large number of crew. And then the biggest problem, what I'm trying to get here and what I want to have sort of an idea session about at Q&A when I finish here, hopefully soon, is how do we actually bootstrap this and turn this to something different from what it is now, which is us who have built airplanes getting together once a year and maybe doing a fun fly here or there, to having something where you can go to events, you have highly skilled athletes that are like concentrating a lot of their time, if not all their time. Maybe they're a cyclist or something as well, but they're concentrating a lot of their time to be able to go. How do we support that in terms of funding, organization, and everything else? So the opportunities and the uniqueness of the thing, I think if we want to think about it as an Olympic sport, it's got probably the most unique tie-in, right? Which is, it's a Greek myth about Daedalus and Icarus, and the Greeks started the Olympics, and the modern Olympic movement was a kind of a reboot of that about 120 or 30 years ago. But it's heavily tied into that. So it's a very natural fit for that. It's a highly athletic, but also mental sport at the same time, where when you're putting out your athletic effort, it's making it hard to do the flying part. And so it's the combination of those two things that is one of the things that makes it really interesting. You know, you could talk about having autopilots and stuff like that, but I don't think we want to have that. I think a real great part of this is that people who are good at flying can fly more efficiently and do a better job at flying, even if they're, you know, maybe not quite at the athletic level as somebody else who can't do as good of a job at flying. But I see this, and the reason why I don't know if this fits in with the FAI and their World Air Games they've been trying to pull off necessarily, is that this is more of an athletic event with really cool technology associated with it. Technology that's part of the thing that excites me, is the designing and building, but I also like the flying. But to make this a sport, I think the focus has to be on the athlete flying these cool things, and it's really something comparable to cycling or rowing or something else events. But when I think about these things and what would be exciting for spectators and other people to watch, a few of these things like landing accuracy and takeoff from grass and things like that are probably not as exciting. And so I just thinking about it, and we can throw out more ideas later, but I think this would be a good subset. Probably you could start with just the first 3, slalom, pursuit, and sprint. But I think the long distance is pretty important and really shows, it's the hardest one to pull off, but it's really important and kind of shows the effectiveness is not the right word, but you know, what human powered airplanes can do. And then some sort of time trial, kind of like a giant slalom. You could have, well, let me go back to the start here first. So the slalom, again, would be a side-by-side race where you have pylons set up and you have 2 airplanes take off at the same time. Now, you're also timed, but it's just more exciting having 2 going against each other. It would not be the same as the slalom in BHPFC, which is basically just when the body passes over the center line, you would actually have pylons where either the the body of the fuselage or maybe the entire airplane has to go around that pylon in order to qualify. And it would be set up just like that picture I showed earlier of the skiing slalom. Pursuit is like pursuit in track cycling. You have a triangular or a multi-point course all the way to a circular course where you start off from opposite sides. You go a certain number of laps. Maybe it's only one if we don't have the duration. But if we have a long enough wingspan on our plane, we should be able to have the duration to go multiple laps. So maybe you do 2 or 3 laps of a, I don't know, 1 kilometer, half a kilometer diameter circle. And it's timed each time you cross the starting point. And the winner is whoever crosses that last starting point first. I think the technology and athlete part is interesting, and that's a cool part of it, but that's one possibility. Another possibility would be to have different classes based on a spec, like wingspan is the most obvious one, or wing area or weight. You might want to have minimum weights for safety reasons, or you might have maximum weights, something like that. So, for example, like a class that's around 20-meter span for the sprint things, 25-meter span for the mid-range things like the slalom and the time trial, and 30+ meter span for things like the long distance flights that you might do, the 10 or 20 or 30K flights. So what about the venues? Airports, obviously, deserts and salt lakes, large fallow farm fields that are set up specifically for the World Championship or Olympic event. Beach and water, we'll talk about that. And then other various field types, most of which aren't big enough. If you look here, some oval, well, I'll go into it by showing the pictures here. There are large, in some places there are large sports fields. This is called 60-acre field, and it's got like, I don't know, 30 soccer fields on it. It's about 1 kilometer long. This is in Redmond, Washington. You can see also over here, it looks like a place where they're growing grass and stripping it off for using in golf courses or something. So that's sort of an example of a big farmer's field that you might be able to do events in. Polo fields turn out to be, I think regulation is only 275 meters in this dimension and about 100 some, I had it in the last slide, 100+ in this dimension. This is at the San Francisco polo field is actually 400 meters from one end to the other. Olympic stadiums over here, the track size is 177 meters by about 92.5 meters. So with the edges around, the track isn't here anymore, but with the edges around, it basically ends up being about 200 meters by 100. It's a little bit complicated. I'm learning about how all this works, but for the Olympic sports, it's the International Olympic Committee oversees the whole thing. And then every country has its own national committee. In the US, it's the USOPC, the UK Sport and UK, etc. And then also there's sport leagues, which are mostly for professional. Sometimes there's amateur sports leagues. Now that the Olympics has become not just purely amateur, but sort of professionals are allowed to take part, they kind of feed back and forth as well. How's the funding happen? So most Olympic sports are funded by a combination of the TV rights, and I think the overall arching really big TV rights are the US TV rights. So what are the next steps? The question is, how do you jump that gap from what we have now, which is a cool sport with a small number of people doing it and having fun, to something where a lot of people are participating and a lot of people are viewing? Do you start at the World Air Games? The latest one was canceled because of COVID. It was supposed to happen this year. And then try to expand from there? Do you start with a media funded event like X Games? Do you try to do a better pitch than the one I'm doing right now with more fancy graphics and stuff to like the people who are funding the Olympics, like the NBC and stuff like that, and say, let's start some demonstration sport that we try to get in as a demonstration sport of the Olympics and have it be a sport? What other mechanism can we do it? Am I totally crazy and smoking crack and this isn't a possibility? You know, what's the, is this possible? Do people think this is possible? Is there some other way that I'm not thinking or listening here that we can do it? That's what I want to talk about.